All right, time for Melon's Mind. So today I'm going to talk about why I'm not quick to give up my rights. But first, if at any point in time you like something that I say, please hit that like button. And if you really like the content, go ahead and subscribe. And if you really, really, really like the content, you can even hit the notification button. I promise I won't blow you up with notifications. I only post about once a week, if that. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Are you quick to give up your rights? I'm not quick to give up mine. So, I would be what people would call either biracial or mixed, in that I am of African and European descent. On the African side of things, don't have much connection to the culture. What I'm getting at is, prior to us being enslaved, I have no knowledge of what went on before that. Sadly, on the so-called black side of my family, our family history is just slavery until now. So that being said, what has been talked about a lot in my family in terms of our history is mostly just oppression and suffering and, the horror stories of those time periods that my ancestors lived through. So I'm not quick to give up my rights because when my dad was born, Jim Crow laws were still in effect. And my dad is still alive and working and not old enough to retire. I say that because that's how close that era is. People are still living that were alive during that time. So the short answer is I'm not quick to give up my rights because, as far as I'm concerned, we just fucking got them. So I am not a fan of limiting free speech. I'm a big supporter of the Second Amendment. I believe in freedom over everything, pretty much. I wouldn't call myself a libertarian, but I do tend to fall into that live and let live mind, or live and let live belief. So I guess that's sometimes where I end up falling or being classified as for some people. But so I'm going to bring up something from our nation's history, and if you're not familiar with it, you should look it up because I'm not a historian. I'm not going to go in depth. This is a very quick paraphrase, but you should look up U.S. versus Cruikshank. Now, briefly here. The Cruikshank case arose from the 1873 Colfax Massacre. Look up the Colfax Massacre, in which a group of armed whites killed more than 100 African American men as a result of a political dispute. 3 men convicted of violating the 1870 Enforcement Act, a law aimed primarily at curbing KKK violence that forbade conspiracies to deny the constitutional rights of any citizen, appealed on the grounds that their indictments were insufficient. When the case reached the Supreme Court, the court sided with the defendants, holding that the rights they were alleged to have violated were not enforceable in this case. Pay attention. The First and Second Amendment rights to assembly and the bearing of arms were, according to the court's ruling, intended only to restrict the actions of the federal government and did not apply to the states or private citizens. That sounds familiar. Kind of like how Facebook and YouTube and Twitter can censor people's freedom of speech because they're private companies. Our constitutional rights don't apply there. But we do have to raise some moral questions of whether or not it's right for what are basically like public forums to control the narrative of what's being said and what's allowed to be said. So, backtrack a little bit. The First and Second Amendment rights to assembly and the bearing of arms were, according to the court's ruling, intended only to restrict the actions of the federal government and did not apply to the states or private citizens. And the 14th Amendment rights to due process and equal protection applied only to state action, and again, not to the action of private individuals. This Supreme Court ruling, which stated that states and private individuals did not have to abide by people's constitutional rights, is what gave southern states the ability to have Jim Crow laws, and it made it very difficult for us to overturn those laws because of this Supreme Court ruling. Decades after Cruikshank, the Supreme Court began incorporating the Bill of Rights to apply to state governments. Decades later, I'm talking the court incorporated the First Amendment's freedom of assembly and Dijon, sorry, I can't say that name, versus Oregon in 1937, while the Second Amendment was incorporated in McDonald versus the City of Chicago in 2010. And notice this is just the First and Second Amendment. We're not even talking about, the entire Bill of Rights here. So yeah, if you give up your rights, it's really fucking difficult to give them back. Or if they're taken from you, it's really freaking difficult to get them. So again, the ancestor thing, with this last election that just happened in 2020, all I hear people say, even though we have this stupid ass duopoly between Trump and Biden, all I hear people say is, oh, you gotta make sure you go out and vote because your ancestors, they suffered and they fought and they died for this right. Well, I'd like us to keep that same energy for the First Amendment, for the Second Amendment, for the Third, the Fourth, the Fifth, and all of our other inalienable rights that we allow governments to infringe on daily. It's getting worse and worse. We keep allowing it. And I don't hear us bringing that same energy to those rights. It's just to this fucking puppet show choosing between two racists. So that's why I didn't vote for Trump, and I didn't vote for Biden either. I'm trying to think here in terms of a loving way to put it. And if you voted for Biden, I don't want to hear you bitching about systemic racism for the next 4 years. You put that shit into power. If you just did a fucking 2-second search on his website to see what his policies are, you'd see that he's bringing back things from the '94 crime bill, which are the epitome of systemic racism. So if you spend all summer out there protesting Black Lives Matter, systemic racism, and then you go out and vote for systemic racism, that is first-class goofy, and I don't want to hear you bitching about it.
He's a clown? Why didn't I see it before?
It's fucking absurd. Just people consenting to be governed by a racist and then complaining about racism. It's just fucking stupid, and I'm sick of it. So my conclusion, just as people are quick to, or not quick to give up their right to vote because it was hard for people to get the right to vote, I'm not quick to give up any of our other rights. I heard a quote that I really liked that said, we should be much more forgiving on the past and much more harsh on the present. We are going to be somebody's ancestors. We're going to be passing down either a world of freedom or a world of enslavement. And we're now reaching the point where the enslavement that we're giving to the next generations might be so extreme that they don't even have the thought to know how extreme it is because their entire minds are controlled at this point. I'm choosing freedom over the illusion of safety.